Hello and welcome back to Parking Live. I'm Jade Neville, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Matt.
Thanks, Jade, and hi everyone. Great to have you with us. When it comes to understanding parking and curb use, cities have traditionally faced two extremes. On one hand, there's the labor-intensive approach. That's staff walking blocks with clipboards and cameras, collecting data samples that are often incomplete and sometimes unsafe to gather. On the other, there are costly network systems that involve sensors, cameras, and communications hardware. And these provide constant data, but they require significant investment to install and maintain. Neither approach is truly sustainable on its own, but there may be smarter, more scalable methods that can provide cities the insights they need without the burden of constant manpower or expensive infrastructure.
And that's where today's guest comes in. Many of you will know Peter Richards for his championing of the digital curb. Now he's helping cities and businesses as varied as large shopping centres and community markets take on a new approach to data collection, using aerial surveys and advanced analytics to capture patterns of demand that were once impossible to measure at scale.
So Peter, welcome to Parking Live. Could you start by telling us a bit about your background and what drew you to parking, curb management, and data analytics?
Thanks, Matt. I'm a transportation engineer. I've completed over 50 parking strategies across North America. This then led to my interest in curbside management. Toronto was one of the first cities to complete a curbside management strategy 10 years ago. And then this led to me being project manager for 2 curbside management strategies in Southern California. And then I helped co-found and I led the curbside management software CurbIQ for the first 6 years, helping deploy it in cities like LA, Seattle, Toronto, Dublin, and more. And now I'm the CEO of Parkalytics, which is a drone-based parking data collection and software company. And it's a company I really wish existed back when I was doing those 50 parking strategies I mentioned, as one drone pilot can replace a large group of manual data collection staff. And I always had a hard time gathering staff and sending them to a remote place on a summer-long weekend. When we take all this data and we put it into the Parkalytics software, which gives you visual insights that manual surveys do not, and it's a faster, safer, and more scalable way to do parking studies in cities, campuses, and major events.
Great, thanks, Peter. And I tried to fly a drone a very long time ago. It was only a little toy one, thankfully, because I could have really caused some damage. So I'm glad there are people out there now that are professional drone pilots, because that's definitely not me. But I suppose a big question is, you kind of touched on it already about the efficiencies that drones provide, but why drones? What do they offer that's beyond that kind of traditional survey methods or sensor-based systems, that we currently use today?
Yeah, great question, Jade. Drones can survey large geographic sites that are essentially impossible to survey manually. Safety is another reason. We can use one pilot to survey large sites, and that would be quite risky to do with manual staff walking in the field, as most parking lots don't have segregated walkways for pedestrians across the entire site. And you may have come across this, and you touched on this in your first episode of Parking Live. Unfortunately, I've had minor infield incidents with staff being accosted, and that doesn't happen with a drone. And the visual component's a big one for me. Being able to see illegal parking, queue lengths, blocked parking spaces, delivery drivers huddled on sidewalks or curbs, and just overall congestion is a very powerful thing that an Excel graph simply doesn't give you. And as you capture a large area and decide months later that you want to analyze a new area, such as on-street parking, we can process that too.
It almost gives you that 360 view of the landscape, doesn't it? And I've been there myself, plodding around on streets, ticking paper sheets, looking at compliance and looking at non-compliance surveys in the pouring rain of many places in the UK. As you can imagine, the weather's not great most of the time. But yeah, I can see that you're getting a much more detailed view using visual representation, as well as, I'm guessing there's an AI element in there as well to track, where vehicles are actually parked and identifying what types of vehicles they are as well, which is really great to hear.
Yeah, I'd be really interested in some of the insights this approach has generated. Can you provide us with some real-world examples where aerial data has changed the way organizations think about parking or the curb space?
Yeah, using drones has really opened up large geographic areas that you wouldn't get the rich data insights that you would normally get if you use manual survey staff. So, for example, Parkalytics partnered with a large engineering firm who were tasked to capture parking utilization, turnover, and dwell time at a shopping mall, which had 6,500 spaces, so absolutely massive. And it needed to be captured every 30 minutes, meaning each of these 6,500 spaces needed to be visited in a 30-minute period. I don't know how many staff you would need to do this, 20, 50, but you could drive around maybe with 8 or 10 people, but then you're contributing greenhouse gases. We had one drone pilot accomplish this all for us. We then made a lovely heat map in Parkalytics. And if I showed you the image, you could guess where the mall entrances were based on the parking utilization and occupancy. But there were some anomalies that you wouldn't get from zonal or entire site level data. Some spaces spiked and some were not as popular despite their proximity to key amenities. So you can use this information to decide where specialized spaces such as accessible parking or EV charging should go. And this can help with site redevelopment and intensification. You could also use this information to help with enforcement. You could see illegal parking from the imagery, to Jade's point. Fire lanes, sidewalks, vehicles not moving from short-term parking and loading areas, or vehicles in no parking and no stopping areas. These are all things that manual clipboard studies and a few site photos absolutely cannot accomplish for you.
And Detroit's Eastern Market's another case you've been involved in. It's a very different event-driven environment. Can you give us a bit more information about that?
Yeah, this was a study led by Nelson Nygaard, who tapped Parkalytics to help with the survey. Another good thing about Parkalytics is that we find local drone pilots and teach them the simple Parkalytics methodology to enable us to process the drone data using AI that you mentioned, Jade, whereas most companies would need to physically send survey staff remotely, which is costly and time-consuming. And the study at Eastern Market in Detroit, it's a large site, over 40 acres. It's the largest historic public market district across the United States. And you both know market parking and loading, the painted lines mean nothing. People park every which way. And this is where the imagery helped. We could work with the client to discuss how they wanted to quantify the various parking lots and show them an aerial view of things. What we really liked was seeing the spread in the demand peak, which actually varied greatly from hour by hour and day by day based on when various shops and things happened on market days and non-market days. And this helped with a variety of things. Parking pricing strategies, it could help with market staffing, even enforcement. Drones can see in the nooks and crannies and remote areas that staff on the ground may initially miss or may not be in the right place at the right time. So this data helps turn enforcement into a precision tool rather than a blanket approach.
So the data isn't just about counts, right, Peter? It's about painting a fuller picture that supports planning, policy, and day-to-day enforcement. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly, Matt. You can scope the data collection and frequency to your needs and use cases and focus on specific areas to give confidence that items such as parking design, parking pricing, or enforcement staff resources are set up to have the greatest impact.
And the timing points seem really important with this as well in terms of the planning and the impact. And why does it matter to understand not just where the demand is, but then when it spikes?
Yeah, time and time again, I'll see studies that ask for 2 or 3 data snapshots. And this is how some places actually forecast their 10-year parking strategies based on 3 data points. However, I also don't think you need the opposite. I don't think you typically will need 24/7 data across every space until the end of time. Since drones can survey large areas extremely quickly and Parkalytics can process and manipulate this data, you can see the spikes you mentioned, Jade. You can choose your free survey frequency and seasonality. These spikes could be related to anything, and it may not even be obvious. It could be localized short-term demand that may not be there in the future, a closure or an incident, an event, lots of other items. So this is why the time and when it spikes is important.
A lot of our listeners work in parking enforcement, and I'm hoping you can share how this data fits into that vision. It doesn't replace enforcement, but how does it support it?
Yeah, we've been asked if we can do license plate recognition with drones, and maybe that's a longer term idea, but we currently fly our drones at 400 feet and collect no personally identifiable information. I would say drones are currently more of a support tool for enforcement. As touched on before, we can highlight some of those demand peaks as well as a visual component to see illegal activities and other observations that weren't initially known or obvious. But we can also find those pockets of vehicles who are overstaying in time-limited areas or stopping in no stopping areas. And special events is a great need. You can understand which lots fill up first, where people are stashing their cars, perhaps illegally, and walking to the event, where there could be a need for additional enforcement, or even a different exit strategy based on queue blockages observed by the zones.
So that's really clear to me. It's not about replacing officers. It's about giving cities a clearer picture so resources can be deployed where they will have the most impact.
Yeah, I don't see drones replacing enforcement teams, but assisting them. It provides visual aids and observations to help guide them and be more strategic instead of reactive or complaint-based, which can sometimes happen with enforcement. And then you can see if these changes persist over time, perhaps in conjunction with a fulsome follow-up survey to determine the impacts of these new enforcement tactics and the change to behaviors and have that visual picture.
So there's a real potential for them to provide predictive data to help deploy enforcement. I'm going to insert a dad joke here. If we zoom out a bit, where do you think the industry is heading when it comes to data and curb management?
Yeah, there's a lot of drone puns, and I'm trying not to lean into them too much, the main one being pilot projects. But yeah, there's a great thirst for parking and curbside data, and drones are a unique and newer offering that have proven to be scalable and cost-effective. This is because you can get space-by-space analysis, turnover, and dwell time across a vast area with no infrastructure or installation needed. So this helps with our general data goal, which is to make informed decisions within an operating budget, which isn't always easy with installations or lots of infrastructure.
Let's not drone on too much about that subject. I had to get in on the game there. I felt like I was missing out. For our audience, operators, city leaders, even developers, why should they care?
Yeah, great question. I want them to care. Data typically drives decisions. Drones are a scalable and cost-effective way to not only accomplish this, but present it in a manner that's more meaningful. Space-by-space data is very powerful when you have constrained sites or even large sites that you want to redevelop. And this data is driving impactful decisions, reducing parking supply, reducing queues and congestion, supporting housing projects and redevelopment, and supporting mobility and transit hubs. So I feel it's driving equitable solutions by the presentation of the data and letting the data talk, not the loudest voice.
Peter, I suppose this is a fairly new technology. And as with any adoption of any new technology, there are always going to be questions. There's always going to be barriers to entry almost, and a bit of uncertainty about taking on new challenges that might come along with adopting these kind of systems. Are there any myths that you want to debunk, or are there any kind of common challenges that you come across, say, for instance, data privacy that you would like to address to our listeners today?
I think a lot of people are concerned about privacy, and the drones typically fly at 400 feet. So if you go to satellite view in Google Maps or Apple Maps, that's a sort of imagery you're seeing in Parkalytics. So your face will be 4 pixels. And I would argue that a Ring doorbell or a smart doorbell is more evasive than a drone. So people have asked about flying over schools or daycares. And, if you can identify anyone from 4 similarly colored pixels, you have some skill that you should take beyond parking. But yeah, there's no real concerns. We can fly over people and buildings with a waiver. We've never been denied a flight anywhere for our 100+ studies. No crashes, and that's not very common with drones, especially with the technology and the adoption of technology. Some of these drone pilots or drones themselves are automated. They just fly in the manner we wish to fly, and it's all pre-automated. So the concern is not there. It doesn't need any power. There's no installation, and we haven't had any real concerns. Hopeful with recent laws and passings of laws that it'll continue to scale.
And Peter, I would imagine from a sustainability perspective, this is much more affordable than dropping a sensor in every single space.
Yeah, and sensors in every single space. You don't get to see anything, so you don't know who is parking there. If you have cameras, they typically cover 6 to 8 spaces, and that's hard to scale across a parking lot of 6,000 plus spaces. You can install them at entrances and exits and capture how many people are on the site, but you don't know where they're parking, how long they're staying. Even if you have license plate recognition, you don't know what they're doing when they're in there. We've had sites where you could see a queue from a Dunkin' Donuts that curls back around and blocks entire alleys or aisles of parking, and that informs design decisions. So, I like to think our model is like the Airbnb or Uber, in that we don't own the drones necessarily, but we find people who are licensed pilots to fly it in the Parkalytics methodology. So it's very scalable.
What do you see the future holding for this? Where do you see the next, 1 to 2 years of development in this kind of technology? Where do you see it going?
I think event management is a massively underutilized market for this. I think, with the FIFA coming to North America, the Olympics coming to North America all in the next 3 years, I think that which parking lots fill up first is important. And then in terms of exit as well, there's often manual staff on the ground and pylons and kind of there's strategies, but you don't have that iterative approach that a drone analyzing your current strategy would have. So it's a way to test where your pickup and drop off goes, how you are releasing different parking lots. So I think events, large attractions, especially with all these major events coming to North America in the next few years, is an area that I think will really work well with drones and data analytics.
That's really interesting, actually, because you can, again, excuse the pun, you can zoom out and see where the pressure points are changing depending on the influx of traffic, and then obviously the egress after the events actually happen, and what knock-on effect that then has beyond that. So that's, it's a really interesting point, actually.
And directing people to certain lots, pricing different lots, the release point of different lots, shuttles, all those, we're talking a lot about cars, but also informing bicycle parking. Like we can detect bicycles, buses, different kinds of vehicles. Another great use case, I think, of drones that is underutilized is truck parking, helping them at rest stops and parking stops. And, drivers can only drive so many hours a day. So if they have some information, not even real time, but maybe historical, the dispatch can, help them push further if they wish to do that, or stop sooner, knowing that lot B is always at capacity, but lot A is shown to have areas where you can park and get food and shower and such. So I think identifying that, helping with the design of that, is something that we're interested to get involved in with as well.
Peter, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for breaking this down for us today. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your perspective, Peter. I'm very excited to see how these approaches continue to evolve, and I'm sure it's just scratching the surface at the moment, and there's going to be plenty more to come.
Thanks, Matt and Jade, for having me on Parking Live and asking such great questions.